What's up guys, Justin here with the SketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp Photoshop tutorial for you. So in this video, we're going to talk about creating a pencil-drawn style rendering in Photoshop. Before I get started, I do want to take a second to thank my newest supporters on Patreon, Alan Thavol, Wallace Cooper, and Ronald Kemp. Patreon, as most of you know, is the website where you can support creators that you like on YouTube. So if you like what I'm doing in this channel, if you're enjoying the content that I'm bringing to you, please consider supporting me in that link down below. Now let's go ahead and just jump into it. So one of the things that's interesting to me about creating things in Photoshop is that the images that you create can get really subjective. And what I mean by that is, generally speaking, working in Photoshop is a little bit more like creating art as opposed to working in SketchUp, which is more creating models. And so what that means is you just end up making a lot of little changes. And so honestly, this video is kind of us playing around just to create different images and see what we can do. And that's kind of how you should approach doing things like this in Photoshop, is just don't be afraid to try new things and different things, and just to see what effects you can create. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of follow, first of all, this is a model that I've created in Placemaker. This is Denver, Colorado. And so I've brought in part of Denver, and then what I've done is I've brought one of the buildings in from the Placemaker building bundle. So that's one of the buildings that comes in when you purchase Placemaker. And so what we're going to do in this case is we're going to create this kind of combination view where you have this building right here that has detail and everything else is just kind of background. And we're going to create kind of a pencil-drawn rendered style in Photoshop. And so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick your view angle. So in this case, I've kind of picked this one angle right here. So I'm just going to have my building kind of in the foreground here, and I'll have everything else over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to export different views, or we're going to export different sets of styles from this model to Photoshop in order to kind of layer them together and create a new effect. And so we're going to export a couple different views. So we're going to start off and we're going to create a hidden line view. And I'm also going to link to a website below. It's a website from Alex Hograf, who is a great resource for working with Photoshop and architecture. He talks about doing something similar in one of his videos, and I'm just kind of taking that workflow, and we're basically kind of seeing what I can create based on the way that I would do it. So, and that's something that you should always be doing, is looking at workflows and figuring out what works for you and what doesn't, and that kind of thing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to export a couple different styles out of our model. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to select a hidden line style. And we're going to go into our styles and we're going to edit this, and we're going to create a couple different views. In this case, we're going to create one view where we're showing our edges, everything's kind of black and white. We're going to have some kind of edge extensions in here just to add a little bit of detail to where our lines come together. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn the axes off. So we're just going to go up to View, Axes, and that'll turn those off, so that's not showing up in the background. And once you have the view that you like, you're going to go ahead and you're going to export that to an image. So you're just going to go up to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And you're going to go ahead and you can save this with as much or as little detail in the file name as you want. But go in and select, in the options down at the bottom of the page, go in and select what you'd like your resolution to be. In this case, I just typed in, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 1920, and I'm just going to let it keep the aspect ratio. You could also export this bigger if you wanted to, or you could use your view size. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and pick this, and I'm going to go ahead and name this Hidden Line, Edges, and Extensions. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And so now we're going to go in and we're going to adjust this again so that we get kind of some kind of background edges in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn my extensions back off, and I'm going to turn X-ray mode on. So you're going to go to Styles, Edit, you're going to click on the second box and you're going to click X-ray. And you'll note that right now this says Transparency Quality Faster. Well, if you click this drop down to Nicer, then you can actually adjust how opaque and how many lines kind of show through. So you can kind of adjust this to your liking. This is kind of a trial and error process. But I'm going to go ahead, and I don't want this to be super X-rayed, so I'm going to go with 40. And so once I have this the way that I want it, making sure that I still have the camera view, I'm going to export this. So I'm just going to go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And you can save these as scenes, so you can come back to the styles over and over again. In this case, I'm just kind of doing a quick thing in here. You could definitely start saving these as styles so you could flip back and forth between them. And then, so I have those two different views that I'm going to use in Photoshop. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to create a kind of a clay rendering. So a clay rendering is like a black and white rendering that you do of an image in order to get an idea of where the shadows are going to be, that sort of thing. And in this case, I'm going to use the extension Ambient Occlusion just because it's a quick, easy way to do this. You can use any rendering program you want. They all kind of have options for creating kind of a clay rendering. And so you can see how that's basically just rendering my faces so that they have shadows on them and everything like that. And one thing that's going to be really important, it's going to be really important that you match the aspect ratio of your images that you were exporting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this off my screen for a second. I'm going to go back up to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and I'm going to find this width and height. So this was a 1920 by 1109. And so I'm going to bring this back, and I'm just going to set my resolution to 1920 by 1109 because you want the images that are created to be the same size. And I'm going to let this render for just a second. And Ambient Occlusion is a good quick rendering extension, so I'll link to that in the notes down below, but there's a lot of others you can use as well. If you want something free, you can do a clay render and twilight render. You can do a lot of different stuff. And alternatively, if you don't want to create a rendered image at all, what you can do, you can set up a view that just has kind of black and white faces on it that has the shadows on without the actual rendered lines in here, and you could export that as well. And so this image is starting to look pretty good, and my render's just about done. So you can see how this just kind of gives me this shaded view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and I'm going to save my image. And again, you can do this with any rendering program. So we're just going to call this rendered image. And we're going to hit OK. And then I'm going to close out of my rendering program, and we should be good to jump over to Photoshop now. We have 3 different images that we're going to open up over there. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to go into Photoshop, and we're just going to open our different files. So in this case, I'm going to open my hidden lines and edges, my hidden line X-ray, and my rendered image. So I just did a control click to select all 3 of those, and I'm just going to click open. So what's going to happen is all 3 of those are going to open in Photoshop. And probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this rendered image as my base model. So what that means is I'm going to go into these other views, and I'm just going to do a control A, and I'm going to do a copy, and then I'm going to come over to my rendered image, and I'm going to do a control V to paste. And so you can see when I paste this into my image, that kind of overlays that rendered image. And so what we want to do is we want to change the blend mode, because the way the blend mode works, right now it's just set to normal, which means it's going to completely overlay on this image. But there's a blend mode in here called multiply that when you select it, Photoshop will actually kind of blend the 2 images together. So you can see how this took your rendered image in the background, which you can turn on and off, and it kind of blended it together with our hidden line X-ray view. And so now we're going to do the same thing with our hidden line edges and extensions. So we're just going to click on that tab, do a control A, and then we're going to click over on our rendered image, and we're going to do a control V. And that's going to bring that into that image as well. And we're going to do the same thing where we click the drop down, and we just select multiply again. And so you can see how now all 3 of those are in here, creating this kind of unique look. And you can definitely come in here and turn these on and off, or adjust the opacity of them to adjust how strong the effect is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a sky to the background here, but I'm going to use a little trick in order to do that. Because if you remember in the past, what we've done is we've come in here and we've kind of used the quick select tool, and then we have to go in and we have to like reselect everything. And this did a pretty good job actually selecting everything. But what we're going to do instead is we're just going to cheat a little bit. And so in order to cheat a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to SketchUp and we're just going to pick a style. It doesn't really matter which one. Probably this architectural design style is fine. And you're going to go in, you're going to turn your profiles off. And then you're going to go into your background, you're going to uncheck the sky, and you're going to add like a red background. So if I drag this color wheel all the way to the left and then I drag this to the top and click OK, you can see how this gives me an image with a red background. And we're going to use that to create a selection in Photoshop. So we're just going to do a File, Export, 2D Graphic, and we'll just call this City Red Background. And we'll go ahead and export that. And then we're just going to open that. So we'll do a File, Open. We'll open our City Red Background, which should have had the same view dimensions. We'll double check to make sure that it did. But we're just going to do a Control A, then we're going to copy it, so Control C. We're going to go over into our image and we're going to do a paste. So we're going to do a Control V. And you can see how this overlays everything in your model. And that's fine for right now, because all we're going to do is we're going to go up to Select, Color Range, and we're going to click on this background. And so basically we're telling Photoshop to come in here and select everything that has this red color. And you can adjust how strongly this brings in those colors by dragging this slider back and forth. So you can see if I move it all the way to the left, it gets a little fuzzier around the edges. If I move it all the way to the right, it gets a lot more precise. But you have to be careful if you have other red colors in your model. In this case, it seems like it's working okay. But we're just going to go ahead and we're going to click OK. And what that did is that selected all of the red in our background. So now that we have this selection in here, we can go ahead and turn this layer off. We're not going to use it anymore. All right, so we're going to leave this on for just a second. Actually, what we're going to do, since we have this selected, is we're going to go ahead and click this box for New Layer Mask. And you can see how basically what this does is this masks out, this creates a mask wherever you had this selection. So that this shows through and everything else gets masked out. Well, what we want to do is we want to type in Control I to invert that mask. And so you can see if you look at this, and if I tap backspace, you can see this will show you where the masked areas are. This created a mask that's basically hiding whatever's in the sky. And we're going to use this in just a second. What we're going to do now is we're going to import a sky image. And so to import a sky image, you're just going to go up to File, Place Embedded, and you can download any sky image. This sky image, for example, was literally the first image that came up when I searched for sky. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click OK, and then we're just going to hold the Shift key and kind of drag this across to kind of size it to our image. And depending on the resolution, you can size it up a little bit too, make it a little bit bigger. It doesn't really matter at this point. We're going to go ahead and hit the Enter key. And so you can see how right now we brought this sky in as our top layer, so it's blocking everything behind it. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use this mask that we created with our red image. And so to do that, you're going to hold the Alt key. You're going to hold the Alt key and you're going to click and drag this mask onto your sky image. And so you can see when I click and drag that onto my sky image, that kind of masks out everything and shows the sky in the wrong place. Well, all we're going to do is we're going to go back up to the sky image. We're just going to hit Control I, which in hindsight I probably just shouldn't have done earlier. But that's how you invert your mask. So you can see how we were able to use this red image to mask this out. So we were able to use this to create our selection with the red in the background. And then we were able to mask this out on the top. And now we're going to turn this layer off. But what we're going to do now is we're going to create an adjustment layer, and we're going to remove the saturation of this image. So in order to do that, you're just going to click on this little button right here. You're going to go up to Hue, Saturation, and you're just going to come in here and play with your saturation settings to make this sky kind of blend in. So I just drag this saturation all the way to the left. So now what we have is we have a sky that's kind of the same color over here. And we're going to adjust this a little more in a second, because it kind of stands out a little bit in the sense that everything else is kind of sketchy edges and sketchy lines in here, and the sky really isn't. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, I think we're going to apply a blur to this sky. And so in order to do that, I'm going to click on the sky image, go up to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to use this Gaussian blur option. And so what that's going to allow me to do is, you can see if I drag this all the way to the left, the sky stays very well defined. But if I start dragging it to the right, it starts blurring this out a little bit so that this matches up a little bit better with what's actually in our model, only in the sense that it doesn't look like we took an image and we just kind of dumped it in the background. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that one. If you remember, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of fooling around with different things in this model. Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to apply kind of a pencil style to this, and we'll kind of see how this works. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay kind of a pencil sketch image over top of this. And you can literally just go on Google and just do a search for pencil stroke image, and probably the first thing that comes up will be this kind of drawn texture stroke option that you can download and use. And there's probably others in here as well. So you could probably also do pencil stroke, overlay, and get some other options in here as well. But we're basically going to find a pencil stroke image and we're going to overlay it on top. So I'm going to do a File, Place Embedded. So I'm going to do a File, Place Embedded, and then I'm just going to click and drag this over my whole image. So you can see this gives me a little bit of distortion. That's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to kind of blend that in with our image anyway. And I don't really like what the multiply does, because you can see how when it multiplies, it really darkens this whole thing up. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to leave this as normal, and we're just going to turn the opacity down. So I'm going to fool around with this and maybe turn my opacity to about 30% or something like that. And we'll see how that works. So you can see how this gives me this kind of pencil drawn overlay, but now my lines look kind of out of place. And so I'm going to try coming in here, and I'm going to try to take the hidden line style, and I'm just going to adjust this so that my lines have some jitter, and I'm probably going to turn profiles on just to thicken those up a little bit more. You can see how I'm really just kind of messing around with this and seeing what I can create and how I like this view. And I think that I like the way that this looks. Let's go ahead and give it a try. So I'm just going to export that as a new image, as a new 2D graphic. And so we'll just call this jitter lines, and we'll export that. And we'll go ahead and we'll bring that in as a layer. So we'll just do an open jitter lines, and we'll just do a Control A. And then we'll do a Control V. Whoops. We'll do a Control A, we'll do a Control C to copy it, and then we'll come over here and we'll do a Control V to bring these jittery lines in here. And you can see how what this is doing is this is overlaying everything, so don't forget to set your blend mode to multiply. And then I'm going to go ahead and click, I'm going to drag this down under the pencil view, because what it was doing here is it was taking this image and it's putting it on top of this pencil overlay. We want the pencil overlay to be over top of everything, because that's what's kind of generating this hand-drawn look. And so the last thing I'm going to do, because I generally like the way this looks, I probably need to brighten it up a little bit, but generally I like the way this looks, but I still don't like the way the sky is so defined in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my sky image, and I'm just going to turn the opacity down. So we're going to turn this down to like 45–50%. You can see how that gives us a much more pleasant view in here. And so I'm going to see if I can brighten this up with my curves. So, because I feel like it's a little bit dim, we could probably leave it the way it is. I think it creates actually a pretty cool effect. But in this case, I think what I want to do is I just want to add an adjustment layer for curves. And then you can see how you can use the curve to kind of adjust this so that your brights are brighter. So you can increase the contrast by making your brights brighter and your darks darker, but you can just kind of fool around with this and see what you can create. So you can see how you're able to create this kind of pencil drawn style in Photoshop. And so once you get kind of the basics of layering all of this stuff together, you can see how it's just a question of coming through and just adjusting things up and down and finding different things that work to create the image that you want. And then one last thing to note is because of the way we set this up, you can actually turn these layers on and off. So you can turn your different line views and other things on and off in your image to really kind of play around with this and see what kind of image you can create. Like for example, I feel like this fits a little bit better with the pencil drawn style. You could also come up and you can turn the pencil drawn style off, and you can turn these layers back on and see if you like the way that that looks better. So fool around with just turning these layers on and off and seeing what you can create. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought. Is this something that you're interested in? Would you like to see more Photoshop tutorials about something? I just love having that SketchUp conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing in this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. So make sure to check out that link in the notes down below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.